All right, so today I'm going to talk about our first assignment, which is just making pattern on your block. So I've already started this one, but the first thing I'm going to talk about is the linoleum we're going to use. You ordered several sheets of 9 by 12, and I'd like you to cut them just one sheet down in half to a 6 by 9 for our first two assignments. So I'm going to show you how to actually cut linoleum. I'm going to use a scrap piece that I have here at home. So what you're going to want to do is take a straight edge, and I'm just going to cut an inch off of this. All right, so line it up. I have a scalpel knife here at home. You can use an X-Acto knife or a box cutter, doesn't matter. You just want to put some pressure on your ruler, line it up so you're all square. And then you just need to score the linoleum several times. You can cut through the whole thing, but it's not necessary. So you're going to score it a few times. All right. And then I'm going to take the linoleum. You can see where I've cut it. And I'm just going to kind of break it back, right? And it's still connected by the burlap back. So I'm going to take, whatever knife you're using, just be careful and just cut through the burlap. So easy to cut your linoleum down. Remember to measure twice, cut once. And when you do that, the back is burlap, and you may have sort of some of these fringes kind of on the side. So before you go to print, I would take a scissors and just cut all of that little burlap that's hanging over off, because when you go to print, it can catch ink and then get on your paper. All right, so I already have a 6 by 9 here, and I've been sort of playing around with it. But the first assignment I want you to do is just make some sort of abstract design and kind of play with your tools and see what they will do. So the McLean set that I use, you have 4 tools in them, and I always keep these rubber tubes that they send to you to protect the ends. So I keep those and I put them on when I'm not using them. That set came with 4 tools. And in them you have 3 different what's called U gouges. And you'll see, you look at the end and it's shaped like a U. And then you have one that's a V gouge. And again, the end is shaped like a V. And I'll talk about those in a second. Same thing with your power grip set. You have one small U gouge, a larger U gouge, a larger V gouge, and then a couple tools I don't really use until maybe I'm getting to wood, and I'll talk about those in just a second. So if you want, you can just start making marks with your tools. Now your McLean set, these are standard tools. They're very good tools, and they come where you can actually cut them to fit your hand, where you would cut where the end of the tool would fit into your palm, similar to the way the power grip tools can fit. I've never cut mine down. I've just left them the way they came, but you can cut them down just with a saw, like with a miter saw. You can cut to whatever fits your hand. Now, the most important thing when you're cutting is to make sure you don't cut yourself, right? Because one of the things you're going to be sitting, and you'll want to hold your block like this as you're cutting. And if your tool slips, then boom, you're going to go right into your hand or your finger. So you always have to make sure that the hand you're not using for cutting is behind the hand you're using for carving. So make sure you keep that in mind, because remember, no blood in the class. You don't want to cut yourself. So the first thing you can do is to start, now you're using the smaller tools, and they will make smaller marks. I know it's a little bit harder to see my marks, but the one thing when you cut into linoleum on your own piece, you'll see that it kind of is a lighter gray when you cut into linoleum, so you can see where you've cut, right? So I'm not sure if how well you can see this, but there are smaller lines here, and there's some bigger lines here where I've used my other tools. So if you use one of the larger tools, cut here, it just makes larger cuts, larger marks. And wherever you carve in your block will be white because you're carving it away. If you want to, you can take a pencil or a Sharpie and draw, let's say, where you want to, you'd be drawing where you want to keep the material. So wherever you draw is what you're not carving, because that shows you what it will print like, right? So if I draw where I've carved already and where I haven't, you can take a Sharpie as well, and you can draw, you can kind of see what you've left with, right? So that tells me I'm going to leave that on the block, and I'm going to carve out this part right here. So you can draw a whole design on your block and then carve it. And again, what you don't draw, what you haven't drawn with the Sharpie, is what you would carve away. The U gouges, because of the shape of the end of the gouge, tend to make marks that are very even in width, right? Kind of like drawing with a Sharpie. I think of it that way. When you draw with a Sharpie, it tends to make the same width line because of the end of the pen. Whereas if you're carving with a U gouge, a V gouge, the U gouge makes a more consistent mark. If you're carving with a V gouge and you press harder, it carves more material out. And then if you press lighter, it comes up and it carves less out. So you can get a more varied line with a U gouge, one that sort of more undulates. And so instead of being like a Sharpie line, it's more like when you draw with a pencil and you press harder and lighter and you get that sort of lovely line quality. You can get that very easily with your V gouge. So I'm pressing really hard and it's thicker, and I come up and I press a little thinner and I get a thinner line. So for one thing, if you're doing little tiny areas, it's good to come in with a V gouge because you can get little tiny spaces out. And you may like one tool over the other. They just give you different marks when you're carving. So obviously, if you're going to take one of the larger U gouges, just takes out more material. And you can take, let's say, your smaller U gouge. You can even kind of come up, move your block, and cut out almost like little dots out of the block. So where I'm carving out here, I'm going to have some white sort of dots in my image. If you wanted these little circles to be black, you'd have to carve out everything around them. So I'm just moving the block to make little marks. So you could actually take, let's say, a nail with a hammer and kind of go through, and if you're banging the nail into the block a little bit and making an indentation, that will make a mark in your block, right? So with your power grip tools, again, you've got the small U gouge to give you some sort of more consistent lines. And you can practice with lines further apart, together, what happens when you cross hatch them. And again, remember, these are going to be white lines. So if you wanted something that looked like cross hatching, you would actually carve out in between the lines. You have a V gouge here. Again, press harder, you'll get a thicker line, thinner. You don't have to wave it. You'll get a smaller line, right? So it's just nice to have a variety of line thicknesses when you use your V gouge. This tool to me looks more like an X-Acto, and I would use this more when we're carving wood, because wood has a tendency to, it can kind of splinter. And so what I use it for is if I'm carving, if I draw out my design, I would carve around my design to give me just a line, like that would fill with ink. But this gives me something, this is what I do more with wood than linoleum, but it gives me something to kind of carve towards It does work in linoleum too, because I have an edge there that I can carve, and it kind of stops my tool a little bit. And then it also, in wood, it prevents your wood from splintering. It actually makes a nice little edge on those little marks that I carved out right there. This tool I don't use very much. Again, I don't tend to use this set, but you can use it to kind of carve down the side of a line, or there's like, it's sharp on the edge and you can make sort of little marks with that. So if I had the Power Grips tool set, I would probably be using my U-gouges and V-gouges more than I would the tools that kind of look more like flat chisels. So our first assignment, I'm going to finish carving a design on my block. You need to cut your linoleum down in half from your 9x12 to 2 6x9s. And we're only using one block for the first assignment. And the assignment is just to make a non-representational design in your block, thinking about pattern and just playing with and discovering what kind of marks you can make with your tools. In the next video, once we're done carving, we'll come back and I'm going to show you how, I'm going to talk about ink, how to ink these up, and how to print one by hand. So what you need to do now is just finish carving your block and don't cut yourself. So again, when I'm done with these tools, I just put the little tubing that comes with them back together and put them back in the case that came with your set. All right, so next lesson and we'll be printing.